Hi, Satya.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Very nice to see you. So let me ask you some questions. Again, I very much appreciate your taking the time. So let me start close to home with artificial intelligence. I have two questions in succession. I'll ask you the first, and you'll know what the second was from the first. What are you most excited about when it comes to kind of new frontiers of technological advancement of artificial intelligence?
It's an interesting thing. So the thing that I'm most excited about is the underlying change in what I'll call the computing fabric that is enabling artificial intelligence. I mean, I'll come back to sort of talk about some of the specific things, but that ubiquitous computing march is on a fast pace right now, right? Whether it is the cloud compute capacity that's just unprecedented, right? If I want to provision, I mean, think about this. When the OpenAI GPT-3 model needed to be trained, literally they were able to go to Azure and provision the world's biggest supercomputer on demand to train these large-scale transformer models, right? So I think that one of the understated things that has changed radically is that the compute fabric, the agility with which computing is available for doing AI is just transformative. And by the way, it's just not happening in the cloud. It's even the edge, right? So if you're wearing a HoloLens, you literally have a bunch of sensors that you're wearing that is sort of seeing the world, recreating the world, and in that space, recreating objects which are virtual, right? So think about that reconstruction that has to happen on the fly. I mean, that's, it's a hugely compute-intensive thing. And in fact, the cloud and the edge work together. So I feel that that's what's most transformative. And even in a Teams call like this one that you and I are on, to have automatic translation. I mean, think about this, right? Or even the together mode, which is just simple image segmentation and stitching together images so that you have a feeling of being together. Those are the kinds of innovations that excite me. But if I had to pick one, which, as someone who has grown up in this industry, has been tracking AI, these multimodal, large-scale transformer models, like our own Turing model or GPT-3, right, are just have emergent phenomena. Each time you throw more compute at it, they are able to do just NLG or natural language generation. By the way, natural language generation now, same techniques can even be used for image completion. I mean, you just give it the seed, literally pixels, and it completes the picture. And so it's just stunning to see that capability. I'm not one of those who believes that we're at the cusp of, all of AI problem or the AGI right here, but I feel like there's something in the model architecture here that gives me more confidence that we will have some real breakthroughs at an accelerated pace.
That's fascinating. So then the complementary question, what are you most concerned about when you think about that advance, if anything?
Well, I mean, I think that the core challenge is to not sort of this technology, like all technologies, has mystical capabilities, but it's not to abdicate our responsibility, right? I mean, you can't say AI did it. You, as the creator of AI, or we as creators of AI, will first and foremost have to have a set of design principles, right? People, in fact, we got to go from, I'll call it ethics, to actual engineering and design and process that allows us to be more accountable, ensure that our models are fair and non-biased, right? So if it's a language model that's picked up a bunch of embeddings because of the corpus on which it trained, you've got to go back, check the lineage of the corpus, make sure you de-bias it. And so that is the hard engineering work that one has to do so that the design of AI itself is something that is really helping us create safe AI. But one of the other things, David, I've been thinking a lot about is if this is the design time, there's another challenge, which is the runtime, right? I mean, you do need to be able to say, okay, every technology does have unintended consequences and bad use cases. We have dealt with this with regulation. We have dealt with this with other techniques. But one of the key things is, in this case, I think that runtime is as important as the design time. Something that has been built may have many virtuous sort of effects, but it will have unintended consequences, and you got to make sure that you protect against that.
And just maybe follow up on that. What about in terms of choosing which problems to which you should apply AI? Is that something that you focus on? Where is, a lot of sort of economists and policymakers talk about, well, things that complement people versus kind of make them redundant. Is that something that is a kind of an engineering choice, or is that kind of out of the hands of engineers?
It's an interesting thing. The way at least I come at it, right, is the world has benefited significantly with advances in technology and advances in productivity, right? I mean, if I go back, whatever, the 250 years or so of sort of modern life has been shaped by rapid advances in technology, which then resulted in productivity gains, which just in general did result in all of our lives getting better. But was there displacement? Was that displacement tumultuous? Was that, needed structural support of other institutions? Absolutely. So I think that instead of sort of putting constraints on the thing that helps us grow, I think we've got to even sort of solve for it more holistically. I know you, articulate some of the policies that are needed, for example, in labor markets. So, but yes, let's start with. In fact, one of the things which is very exciting to me, David, is I just talked a lot about big AI. One of the things that I feel is making a real difference is what I'll sometimes call real-world small AI, right? So we have a platform called Power Platform, which is very exciting. You put it in the hands of domain experts in the first line, manufacturing, retail, hospitals. They're able to take their domain expertise and turn it into automation using a lot of the AI capabilities, whether it's image rec, speech rec, or what have you. And that's all gaining productivity. That means those jobs now should have better wage support. So to me, something like that is what I think we should always choose when it's available. But at the same time, if you have a real breakthrough, which does have some labor displacement, let's not fall for that lump of labor fallacy, and then make sure that the jobs that need the labor, basically the wage support and the skills required to get the new jobs are all being invested in.
So actually, and that segues into the sort of the next thing I want to talk about. One thing our task force of Work of the Future report highlights is how much technology has been involved in the creation of new work, right? We didn't have solar engineers. We didn't have computer engineers. We didn't have pediatric oncologists. We didn't have, many types of entertainment until we had the technology that not only made it feasible, but created the demand for expertise, the new knowledge, the new type of work. It wasn't just the machine did it. A whole new occupation came into existence. New industries came into existence. So when you think about the new types of works, do you have a sense of what do you envision in the years ahead? I know that's a very hard question. Where do people come in? What opportunities or new tools or new possibilities do you see us creating or your company creating as we automate some of the existing activities?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I still remember the early days of the PC and how what was knowledge work got fundamentally transformed, right? I remember when all of us got spreadsheets the first time, our relationship with numbers, right? Our ability to do analysis, or even the word processor, what it did for us to be able to create, communicate, collaborate on what is considered today knowledge work. I believe the same is happening with this as computing is getting embedded in the real world, in a manufacturing plant, in a retail setting, in a hospital, in a farm. I think everybody, in some sense, this notion of a citizen developer, a citizen data scientist, a citizen app developer for automation, I think is real. So the thing that I was referencing earlier, this Power Platform tool set of ours, is one example. Like it's like what one could do with Excel, because Excel was one of those things where you could start at it and just say, hey, I know rows and columns. That's the only abstraction. There could be others who'd say, oh, I'll learn a few macros. There's a real full Turing complete language and a system on site, so you can even write everything. So Excel had that nice way of allowing you to use the tool set depending on the task at hand. Similarly, I feel now we're transcending beyond knowledge work to help people who are in the construction site, in the care management in hospitals, in manufacturing shop floors, to all participate in being able to do digitized work. And that, to me, I think is going to shape the new types of jobs, or even existing jobs that become more enriched, drive productivity, and obviously, hopefully, the wages go up with it.
Right. One concern about this is, much of the work you're describing, kind of reflects a shift from kind of physical skills to abstract skills, right? To envisioning what you want the machine to do and complementing it with your knowledge of what needs to be done. And so, for speaking as highly educated workers, we think, well, that's great. We know stuff, and we like that. Do you see it also opening opportunities for people who don't have that kind of specialization? And that could be in the developing world as well as the developed world. We're certainly not limited to speaking of the US here.
Yeah. See, for example, one of the things, the HoloLens use cases for me have been really revolutionary in that sense, right? So if you take the place where it's getting used, for example, is for a remote specialist. Or say there's a manufacturing person. In fact, there's a real example of a person who got employed for the first time in a PACCAR plant in Ohio, and they needed to get up to speed on the job, right? In fact, the learning curve for somebody who gets employed on a manufacturing line is pretty steep. And so here, what was the combination of a remote engineer who was an expert, holographically helping this person learn the skills, and guides, which are, think about this as tutorials that are there in place right in front of your eyes. That is first empowering, right? The fear of, wow, like, how do I do this job? Just when, if somebody can say, I can help you just when you need to, do something that is more intricate, right? And it's sort of changing even how surgeons use it, or remote specialists in many other engineering fields are also using it. But I actually think you could democratize expertise a bit. But more importantly, the one thing that is happening, David, in this time of pandemic and COVID is where the expert can be remote, but can perhaps more seamlessly transfer their knowledge to the person in frontline. And so the result of that is more capability in the frontline.
Yeah, I think the educational possibilities of augmented reality or virtual reality and just, content on demand are remarkable. I mean, I think if we could get more, look, it may put me out of a job. Universities are very inefficient and very expensive. But if we can democratize education and use the tools to make people more effective and at learning, and also enjoy learning more, that would be a remarkable.
That's right. And I think your point about, hey, you can't, sometimes we overstress. STEM is going to be important, but it's not like we need everybody to be a master's in computer science to be employed, because that'll be a massive failure of our skilling programs and a massive failure of our labor market policies, because the goal here is to, in fact, go the other way, which is, can I take the expertise and democratize it to help productivity gains of a frontline worker? That's the problem to solve.
So let me actually zoom out one further step. You've talked about the purpose of a corporation and stakeholder capitalism for some time. What does it mean to you, to Microsoft, to be a purpose-driven company? And what are the lessons for other organizations as well?
It's something that I've been thinking a lot about. In fact, in the very beginning of the 2020, before we knew we were in a pandemic, I sort of said, what's going to really define the next decade? In fact, I went back. I was reading Colin Mayer's book called Prosperity, and I thought his definition he had was a good one, which I like, which is the purpose of a corporation is to find profitable solutions to the challenges of people and planet. And I think that that's sort of a good way to describe the key word being profitable and then challenges of people and planet. When we talk about multi-stakeholder capitalism, that's the point, right? Which is, it's not that, I do believe shareholders and being accountable to shareholders is a good thing. That entire shareholder primacy came about because I felt, or at least it was felt, that management teams were out of control and not accountable to anybody. And so now I don't think it's about, okay, let's not be accountable again. It's more about being more accountable to more stakeholders, and because our shareholders want it, right? So one of the things that I look at it, say when at Microsoft, we say our hourly workers are going to get some more benefits. I got to make the case to our shareholders why that is in the long-term interests of Microsoft, because after all, which employee will want to work at Microsoft if we don't take care of all the people who work at Microsoft? So that's, I think, what is really being played out. And it speaks a little bit to some of the sort of things that you've written about, right? I think overall, we live in communities, we work in communities, we live, and so the vibrancy of all of those communities with everyone is going to be very important to any company thriving.
Well, so let me bring you back to what you were just speaking about the workers. So one thing we know about the American economy is there's been this growing gulf between the trajectory of productivity and the path of the median wage of the median worker. And one can argue about, well, is the median really not growing? Maybe it's only growing a few percent, but the gap between them is sort of invariant to how you measure that, right? And so we can say, look, the information age has been great for people at kind of the 70th percentile and up. Obviously, it's been super great, about that. But does this concern you? Does technology have anything to do with it? And most important, what can and should we do about it? We, including Microsoft, including larger organizations or larger institutions than that.
Yeah, I mean, again, you are all the experts, and quite frankly, in fact, reading some of your papers and your work here has been, eye-opening for me, right? I mean, the point is that there are some great examples of countries that seem to have done better job of managing this transition, which is you can still be all for technology and productivity while you keep wage support for jobs and the creation of new jobs at the frontier as well. And I think that, so what are some of the policies? What should we do at Microsoft, for example? Let's make sure as we are talking about all the technology breakthroughs, we're also ensuring access to technology, right? Whether it's rural broadband or devices is something that we put our, might behind. So that's just one example. Another one is skilling. I'm very, very focused on ensuring that we are making sure that skilling and availability of education that leads to credentials, so that leads to employment, is very important. So even LinkedIn, for me, that economic graph underneath LinkedIn is the real-time feedback loop between jobs of the future, skills required, so that then creates the incentive for someone to then get credentialed, pick up those skills. So we're doing a lot. Like even inside of Teams, we're seeing a lot more of companies, even for the first-line workers, incorporating training as part of their daily workflow, right? So instead of saying, oh, go off, get a cert, come back, what if we keep giving you certifications as part of your work? Because you did learn something today. And that cert is something, or credential is something that then you can put on your LinkedIn profile, for example, and the next employment opportunity opens up because of that. So I think that combination of access, skilling, and finding the jobs is where we will have to do our very, very best work, and Microsoft's super focused on that.
So I'm going to sort of make an economic point that, when people look at that productivity gap, they say there's sort of an implicit assumption that, well, the median should grow with the overall productivity, but it doesn't actually have to be true. It depends on the productivity of whose productivity is rising, right? So it could be that productivity is rising very unequally at different wage or education levels. That probably is true, in fact, because this era has been very complementary to people who have abstract and technical skills. However, and this comes back to what you were saying a moment ago, we have a choice about how productive that median worker is, depending on how we invest in them. And I think so. I guess where I'm strongly agreeing with what you're saying is the kind of commitment to improving opportunity is actually a commitment to making people more productive.
That's right. And in fact, one of the recommendations that looks like you articulate, which I like a lot, is, for example, we have R&D tax credit. We should have tax credit for corporations for really investing in training. That was one of the things that I was pretty shocked by, is the actual investment made by corporations in training their own employees so that they can keep up with times it's been going down. So the question is, how do we create the right incentive mechanisms for that?
Yeah, and we say in our report, we would be in favor of a parallel to the R&D tax credit, a training tax, but of course the training, as you were saying a moment ago, needs to be linked to externally recognized certifications. Otherwise, all kinds of things can happen with the tax credit.
In fact, that's exactly right. And in fact, one of the things that as we've studied these training programs and skilling programs, sometimes they fail because they don't have that feedback loop. And that's why we're even sharing more of that LinkedIn data. That's one contribution we can make with cities and government officials everywhere, so that their skilling and reskilling programs have the market signal really helping the efficacy of those programs.
Let me ask you about telepresence. So during the COVID-19 crisis, many, but certainly not all workers have been fortunate to be able to continue their work telepresently. You and I are having this conversation. Not clear we would have been able to have this conversation if we weren't doing it telepresently. When the crisis ends, do you think we're going to stay telepresent? And if so, how will this affect our productivity, our creativity, our ability to hatch new ideas? For a long time, we thought we had to be like right next to one another. Can we make telepresence as good or better than being there?
I mean, I think all those things are going to be true, David. I mean, the thing that, first of all, as you described it, well, whatever, about 60% of the people still go to work so that the other 40 can stay at home today. And I think that will change once the constraints of the pandemic go away. I think for sure there's going to be real structural change, right? People are going to question what really requires presence that is physical versus telepresence. And I think work and workflow will adjust. At least to me, there seem to be three things that I'm studying, and we're collecting lots of data and learning. One is the nature of collaboration, and one I referenced already, which is what is the collaboration that happens between, I'll call it frontline and, say, knowledge work, right? So which is the engineer, maybe he's even working from home, but there is a frontline technician, but with, telepresence and technologies like HoloLens, can you bridge and help them collaborate and be very productive? That's in fact, that will be, now once you've established that connection, that means you can transcend space, and you can imagine, right, even if the person is in Seattle and somebody else is in a rural area, you can collaborate and so on. So I think it has really profound implications. The second one is meetings, like video meetings like the one we're doing, is one aspect of the workflow, right? Work doesn't just happen when people are in a meeting, in a video meeting. Work happens before and after. So we're really thinking about that collaboration. Some people could be together. Some people are offline. So async, sync. How do you really make sure that there is a full fabric? So even Teams, we didn't build it saying, okay, you use it during the pandemic, and once you're done with video meetings, you don't need, Teams is built for that all-up collaboration during, after, before meetings. Another aspect is learning. Because I think all of us are dealing with, I'm sure you are hiring new faculty. Of course, you're doing online courses. How do you onboard people? How do you really build even social capital, knowledge capital? And that has been another aspect of idea of, hey, let's deliver training. Let's deliver, in fact, connections. One of the things we measure is your social connections inside the organization, and recommend that you make more connections in order to be able to learn the skills and learn what you need to do to be able to be better at your job. So that's another aspect that's changing quite a bit, where we have digital tools assisting us other than you walking the hallways, so to speak. And then the last one I would say is the well-being. If you think about it, once, like I look at my own life, right? I mean, we know now that if you're if you're morning to evening or late at night, you're doing these video meetings, 30 minutes into your first video call, you have real fatigue. We've done EEG studies where it shows that video meeting fatigue is a real thing. And that's why we have to innovate. In fact, even the Together Modern teams is about really saying, okay, let's get people out of their square boxes, have a shared sense of presence. That reduces the cognitive load. Also help you with insights, right? I mean, just like your fitness band gives you all kinds of information about your health, time in an attention economy is the only scarce commodity. How do we take those breaks for transitions? How do we recharge? Even in as somebody described it, sometimes working from home feels like sleeping at work. How to avoid that? How do we make sure that the overall productivity is only possible if your well-being is very much part of that equation? And so those are three aspects of telepresence and what it does for us, whether you're on the front line or in the knowledge work side, is something that we're studying deeply.
I want to just pick up on two things you said. One was, I love what you said, that time is the only scarce factor in an attention economy, because many people are saying, data is the new oil. But I fully agree with you that attention is the new oil, right? Data is plentiful. Attention is scarce, and we'll never get more of it.
That's right.
And so, so that's fabulous. And sort of thinking about how we focus that correctly, I think, is one of our most significant, opportunities. But let me, on the telepresence, one concern I have in thinking about, I feel like I've become closer to my colleagues that I already know well during the pandemic and further from the ones I didn't. And I feel like I'm never just going to bump into someone on Teams or on my screen and say, hey, what are you doing today? And I worry that something will be lost. And, some of my colleagues that I've noticed, right, they're superstars, like my colleague Drona Samoglu, and he gives a seminar and 1,000 people show up now, right? Previously it would have been 25, now it's 1,000. But that means they're not showing up for someone who's not as well known. Yeah. And so I worry about this kind of hardening of connections. And, so how do you see a way that we get better at this somehow in a virtual world?
It's a very, very good point, because this is one of my big worries. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to sort of make sure we study and collect data and understand. Like, even we are burning, let's face it, we are burning the social capital that got built up. And that's why we have been able to remain productive during this time, in spite of all the constraints. But we're also learning new tactics and new techniques of building back up social capital. So that's sort of the other thing. It's not about, okay, it goes back to exactly the way it was. So we do need to learn new skills. So one of the things I suggested, which is let's even have an AI assist to say, hey, go form connections. So for example, I see this in the data, like the 15-minute video calls are an all-time peak, right? Nobody has the patience to do 1-hour calls, but hey, the ability to your point, cold call your colleague. I saw it on chat. You posted something. Let me call you. Let me talk to you. Let me schedule some time. So that new habits are being picked up. And another place, David, is management, right? Matters. The lead job today is so important, which you have to recognize that you take the 5 people who work for you and make sure that you care for them. They're doing well. They're connected to the right resources and are forming connections. A good manager can make so much of a difference. So that means, in our own case, we are really saying, look, let's invest in building up that management skill. Sometimes you could sort of get away with a lot of bad management just because of the holistic environment of the workplace. Whereas now it shows up in the productivity and the social connection. So, so some new tools and, of course, good old-fashioned leadership at all levels.
Good point. I feel that way with my graduate students as well, that the one-on-one has become more important in this time. So you mentioned we don't want to go over on meetings. Let me ask you one final question. I really appreciate all the time that you've given us. In thinking about our technological future, is there something great on the horizon that we're not even noticing? And is there something we're all sure that's coming that's in fact not going to happen?
For sure, it's like, as the saying goes, which is always we overestimate things in the short run and underestimate in the long run. I sort of stay away from sort of predicting the specifics because I've gotten it so wrong all the time. But the thing I look at, David, is 10 years from now, will there be more compute available per capita? That's, I think, the thing. The question is, it's going to be true. Absolutely, there is going to be per capita more compute capability available. So then the real thought experiment is, what are the real constraints, right? Oh, attention is one constraint. We do need economic growth, right? I mean, for all of, it's not like the world is growing as fast. I mean, some regions of the world can do with more economic growth that's sort of aligned with the planet's stability too, right? So there needs to be real breakthroughs. So I feel what we now need to be putting our best thought into is, how do we use the ubiquity of computing, the availability of more compute, to improve, I'll call it, the overall COGS of the society and the overall OPEX of the society, right? If I had to write an income statement for the world, I want to be able to sort of say, hey, this income statement for 2030 world will have a fantastic top line driven by OPEX, where that compute is helping every dollar of labor, compute is helping every dollar of COGS. That is a framework that at least I would love for us to see, because technology will be there. It's going to be more how we use it, how we make those trade-offs, how we choose. In fact, which sectors of the economy do we reward for having used technology to drive most marginal productivity gain for a society at the whole, I think, are the things that are going to be most important for us.
That's very helpful and very optimistic. And I fully agree with you that we're going to have a lot of technological possibilities, and we want to turn them into productivity growth, because that's like raw material to do many good things with. And then I hope that we'll be able to channel it effectively in a way that we all feel good about the future that we've made. So I very much appreciate your taking the time to speak with us, and all of us on the Work of the Future Task Force, as well as the many people who will be watching this discussion. And I look forward to future conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David. Thanks for the opportunity.